Mulabwanji everyone, hope you're having a fabulous day. My name is Kim and today I'm going to show you how easy it is to make sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is just fermented cabbage and all you need is a cabbage, water and salt. That is it. It couldn't be easier and it's such an amazing addition to your diet. So across the world, whatever culture you go to, you'll find a history of fermentation. And it's because it served a really important purpose back then, because we didn't have refrigerators and freezers and all these chemical preservatives. And fermentation provided us with a way to extend the life of the food, to preserve the food. So for instance, if you go to Germany, yes, sauerkraut, which is what we're doing today. And then if you go to Korea, there was kimchi, which is like a spicier version. Japan, you have miso. In Indonesia, there's something called tempeh. Ethiopia, you have that spongy fermented bread. And of course, here in Zambia, you have chibwantu and munkoyo, these fermented drinks. So whatever culture you go to, you can find the history of these fermented foods. But now, in our modern world, because we have fridges and freezers and preservatives, we've kind of lost a little bit of this history of fermentation. We don't use it as much. And the thing is that, yes, fermented foods increase the shelf life, preserve the food, but more importantly, and what scientific research is backing up now, is that fermented foods, actually the process of fermentation changes the food, increases the nutritional value, makes the food more healthy. And you don't have to eat a lot of fermented foods. You know, a little goes a very, very long way. For me, I've been doing sauerkraut now for a while, and I've just incorporated it into my daily diet. And whatever I'm eating, I just take a spoonful of sauerkraut, put it on there, and it just adds a really nice flavor to it. And like I said before, the process is so easy. You don't even need a starter culture for sauerkraut, because all the microbes that you need are already in the cabbage microbiome. So let me show you just how easy it is. You need your cabbage, and the first thing you do is just peel back the first couple layers of the leaves. Once we've done that, the next thing we're going to do is just chop the cabbage. And it's completely up to you how finely you want to chop it. Some people like their sauerkraut chunky, some people like it more fine. It's up to you. Experiment and see what you like. Once you've chopped the cabbage, you're just going to work it with your hands a little bit to soften it. And also I find it just helps you connect with the food as well. So just soften it with your hands. Once you've done that, we're going to put our sauerkraut into a jar. I got a great jar here. You just got to make sure it's an airtight jar and make sure it's very, very clean, of course, before you start. So here we go. When you fill it, you then have to just compact it. Compact the cabbage. I just use my hand, my knuckles like this, but you could use like a wooden spoon as well, if that works for you. So I've put in my cabbage, try to compact it as much as I can, and you fill whatever jar you're using, you fill about 75% of it. You're going to need to leave a little space at the top. You'll see soon why that is. But the next step is we have to make some salt water solution, basically brine. And super easy, it's about 1.25 teaspoons of salt per cup of water. So I'm going to use Himalayan crystal salt today, the pink salt. It's really important that you use a salt that doesn't have iodine in it. Okay, so normal table salt is not a good idea. Either Himalayan salt or sea salt is also fine. I'm going to use about 6 cups of water. So in terms of salt, it's going to be just under 4 teaspoons of salt. So I'm going to put that in. Plus, of course, with the Himalayan salt, you're getting all those amazing minerals in there and trace elements. So that's another reason to use it instead. Once I've put the salt in, I'm going to add a bit of hot water, and this is just to dissolve the salt, yeah? Give that a quick stir. Once that's kind of dissolved, I'm going to add room temperature water here. So this is about 3 cups of water. Now with this, it's really important that you don't add water with chlorine in it, because chlorine, of course, will kill all the good bacteria that are going to cause your cabbage to ferment. So clean water that is not chlorinated. Generally, in terms of the exact amount of water that I add to the salt, I don't really measure it. A quick way to test whether the water is salty enough is to actually just taste it. So if I taste this, yes, it is definitely salty. It should be, but it is not so salty that I want to spit it out. And that's kind of how you know the saltiness is okay. So I'm then just going to pour this salt water into my jar of cabbage. Really important, guys. Make sure your salt water is not boiling hot if you just added the water from the kettle, because that heat is going to kill the good bacteria in the cabbage, so we don't want that. So I've just covered the cabbage with the salt water, and the next thing is I'm going to take some of those big leaves that I removed in the beginning, and I'm just going to kind of seal it off. So I'm going to press the cabbage down and seal it off from the atmosphere. So let's do that. Just going to find some nice big leaves, and I'm just pressing it down even more. So what you're going to find is that your cabbage and your leaves on top don't want to stay down. So you're going to require some kind of a weight. It doesn't matter what weight it is. The whole purpose of it is simply to keep everything below the water line. So what I've done is I just went out into my garden and found a rock and scrubbed it clean. And this is what I'm going to use as my weight. So I'm pushing it down, and it's keeping everything down. And then all these cabbage, bits of cabbage on the top, I'm just going to remove. So as you can see, all the cabbage is covered by the salt water, and that's really, really important. So what actually happens when you ferment cabbage like this? What is the process? Well, essentially, all the anaerobic bacteria that were in the cabbage, or that are in the cabbage, they start producing these healthy acids, and this drops the pH of the contents of the solution. Anaerobic just means that they thrive in an environment where there's no oxygen, and that's why it's so crucial that we cover everything with this salt water solution, because essentially we're eliminating the oxygen. We still leave a gap at the top where there's no water. That's also important. I'll explain that later. But otherwise, crucial that all the cabbage is covered with the salt water. So as these bacteria start the fermentation process, the acidity increases, so the pH drops, and this prevents other bacteria, especially the pathogenic bacteria, the bad bacteria, from growing. It basically inhibits their growth, okay? Which is brilliant. And instead, you're promoting this environment for the bacteria that produces these short-chain fatty acids that are really healthy for us and responsible for the fermentation. So the next thing is just to close the jar. So, and then you're just gonna leave it on your kitchen counter or wherever you want to. It's important that you do not leave it in direct sunlight though. But I leave mine on the kitchen counter because then I don't forget about it. Because one crucial step that you have to do now every day is that you have to open the jar and burp it. Because as that fermentation process takes place, you'll start seeing bubbles coming and they're going to rise to the top and you have to burp it. If you don't, it's unlikely, but the pressure in there is going to really build up and you certainly don't want a little explosion on your hands. So just burp your sauerkraut every day. I start tasting my sauerkraut maybe after a week and a half. Generally, I tend to leave it for 2 weeks. But it's up to your taste. Of course, the taste becomes more tangy, a little bit more acidic the longer you leave it. So I found for me, 2 weeks is plenty. Two things that have a massive impact on your fermentation are temperature and how salty your water was. So temperature-wise, the cooler the temperature of the environment where you keep your sauerkraut, the slower the fermentation process. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the slower the fermentation process, the less likely you're going to get mold. Also, with the salinity, or how salty your water was, the more salty your water, the slower the fermentation, and once again, less chance of you getting mold in your sauerkraut. So a lot of people ask, well, how do I know if it's got mold in it, Well, just use your common sense, okay? If you start seeing something blue or green or fuzzy growing on the top of your sauerkraut, that is mold. Now, some people are just happy to kind of scrape that off and then continue with the fermentation, but if you want to err on the side of caution, just throw the batch away and start again. Now, if you were to notice a white powdery yeast on the surface, it's called Kahm yeast, Kahm. It is not mold, and it is certainly not harmful for your health. Do not worry about it. And you can just take like a paper towel and just kind of scoop it from the surface. Okay, so don't worry about that. You just worry if you see something blue, green, pinkish, furry growing. Then you have a problem with mold. But to be honest, I've done so many batches with sauerkraut now, and I actually have never experienced any mold. But I'm very, very careful to make sure I cover everything in the salt water as well. So when you've fermented it for about 2 weeks, and you've tasted it and it's absolutely delicious, and you want to stop the fermentation, all you got to do is put it in the fridge. And when you do that, essentially what you're doing to the microbes is like you're shouting, freeze, and they just freeze and they stop. And if you keep it in the fridge, it will keep there for months. But hopefully you'll eat it quickly. So I'm just going to keep this now on my kitchen counter for 2 weeks. But I just wanted to show you the batch I had in the fridge, because I always make sure I have a batch in the fridge that I'm using for to put on my daily food. Here it is. I used a bigger container for this one, but when I open it, it has that very particular sauerkraut fermented smell. I'm so used to it now. I love it. I really do. But you're going to get very used to it as well every time you burp your bottle in the fermentation process. But the sauerkraut, if you've never tasted it, has a very tangy taste. And the thing is that the cabbage is still crunchy. So it still has all that texture when you eat it, even though you fermented it. So once again, sauerkraut is such a healthy food that you can incorporate so easily in your life. And it's so cheap to make. I mean, cabbage, water, and salt. That is it. What makes it so healthy, just to recap, you have those bacteria in there that are producing these short chain fatty acids that have all of these wonderful health benefits. Generally, think of it as they're super anti-inflammatory, and they tend to have antioxidant activity, especially in your gut. And in addition to that, when you're eating fermented foods like sauerkraut, you're taking in these healthy microbes, these healthy bacteria as well. It's like taking probiotics, right? And when you do that, generally, rule of thumb, for every gram of fermented food, you're getting about 1 billion microbes per gram. So if you're having like a tablespoon, that is, I mean, it's incredible how much you're going to take in. And when they've done studies, they show that if you include just a little bit of fermented foods in your diet, then you will increase your healthy microbe intake compared to someone who's eating just a standard modern diet 10,000-fold. Okay, so it's such an amazing food for your gut, absolutely, but for all of your health, because of course our microbiome, our gut, is connected to everything in our body. So guys, make it, and you can experiment as well. You can flavor this with whatever you want. You can put a few cloves of garlic in there or whatever spices you like. Take a chance, experiment, be a bit adventurous, okay? But definitely start fermenting your cabbage and see how your health can improve as well. If you want to know more about your microbiome and the importance of bacteria for our health, check out my lecture on the microbiome, Mastering Your Microbiome. There'll be a link. Okay, for now, have a great day. Take care. Until next time.